So, here's a thought. Have you ever considered that the layout of a room could actually change a political debate? Today, we're diving into the UK's House of Commons to see how its very design might be shaping the way politics plays out in Britain.
When you picture Parliament, you probably think of that classic image, right? Two sides yelling at each other across this narrow floor. It's confrontational, it's theatrical, and honestly, it's what British politics is famous for.
But here's a pretty wild idea. What if all that aggressive behavior we see isn't just about the politicians or the parties? What if the room itself is actually encouraging it? What if the problem is the furniture?
Now, it's so easy to assume this layout is just ancient, an unchangeable tradition that's set in stone. But is that really the whole story?
Well, here's the thing. Most people think the chamber is some medieval relic. But in reality, it was completely rebuilt after it was bombed in World War II. And its confrontational design wasn't an accident. It was a very deliberate choice, reflecting a very specific post-war idea of how politics ought to work.
So this means two things can be true at the same time. Yes, the building is historically significant. Absolutely. But that doesn't mean it's frozen in time. The way the space is used has changed before, which is proof that it can definitely change again. And that just completely changes the conversation, doesn't it? We stop asking, can it change? And we start asking something way more interesting. If we could change it, what kind of tweaks would actually make the biggest difference to how our politicians behave?
All right, so let's explore 3 subtle but potentially really powerful shifts. We're not talking about tearing down the walls, but about changes that could fundamentally alter the whole culture inside them.
First up, where people speak from. Right now, an MP stands up and speaks at the opposition. The whole posture is confrontational by design. But imagine if the speaking position was changed so they had to address the entire room, pulling everyone's focus inward instead of just across that divide.
The whole point of this is pretty simple, but it's also huge. It's not about getting rid of disagreement. It's about creating an environment where it feels more natural to actually listen, instead of just performing for your own side.
Okay, second idea. The seating plan. Right now, MPs sit with their party, which just screams us versus them. But what if they were seated by region or constituency instead? And this quote just nails it. Politics wouldn't suddenly disappear, but the visual story would totally change. You'd see geography cutting across party lines. You'd have MPs with shared local problems sitting near each other. The room would start to look like a country, not just 2 teams facing off.
And the third shift looks at the front benches. The way they're set up now, they're like opposing trenches. They're physically dominant. It reinforces this strict hierarchy and makes it harder for anyone else's voice to feel important. The proposed layout would embed the leadership within the room, maybe side by side, to shrink that physical and psychological gap.
The goal here is to just dial down the theatrics of it all. When leadership feels like it's in the room with everyone else, not floating above them, it can make contributions from all members feel safer, more welcome, and frankly, more consequential.
Of course, anytime you talk about changing a physical space, you run into practical issues. And one of the most important ones has to be making sure the space works for every single person in it.
This is such a great way to think about it. It completely reframes accessibility. It's not a problem you have to solve for the design. It's the whole point of a good design. The goal is to make a better working environment, not just preserve a historical stage set.
Look, the current setup is already really difficult for MPs with mobility issues or hearing needs. Any change, big or small, has to be designed from the very beginning to make things better, not worse. If Parliament's going to be a modern workplace, accessibility can't be an afterthought. It has to be baked into the design from day one.
So, you might be thinking, okay, this is a really fascinating thought experiment, but is any of this actually going to happen? Well, there is a very real and very urgent reason we need to have this conversation right now. And here's why. The clock is literally ticking. The Palace of Westminster is about to undergo a massive restoration project. That means, almost for sure, Parliament is going to have to move into a temporary chamber sometime soon.
All of a sudden, this is not a hypothetical debate anymore. A move is coming. And that gives us this real, once-in-a-generation chance to test out new ideas and really think about what we want our political spaces to be.
It really just boils down to this. 1, we know restoration is coming. 2, that makes the question of the space urgent. And 3, before anyone draws up any new plans, we have to answer the most basic question. What do we want the space to do? What behavior should it encourage?
Because if we don't have that conversation now, the risk is enormous. We could spend billions of pounds just to end up recreating the exact same confrontational dynamics, the same old behavioral cues, just in a newer, shinier room. We'd have completely missed the point.
Which brings us to the final and most important question. Once we accept that space is never neutral, that it's always shaping how we act, we have to ask ourselves, if we got a blank slate, what values would we want to build into the heart of our democracy? What would we want a modern parliament to actively encourage?